Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
I'm over the moon to be able to finally bring them out.
Nature's not optional, and we're not going to be on this planet long without it.
I just want to be with plants.
Today on Spotlight, sunflowers are more than beautiful. They produce a raw material that one St. Louis startup is using. Plus, meet a colored pencil artist who likes to reference other artists in his drawings. And then his books inspire people to protect nature, why he's focusing on oak trees in his new book. But first, meet a scientist who spends her days inside the Missouri Botanical Garden's Climatron. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
I see beauty in the shapes, in the colors of the flowers, in the smells of the flowers, and I just want to be with plants. A lot of my friends from tropical countries always ask me, why did you choose St. Louis? Like there is no tropics in St. Louis. I have to tell them that there is a little bit of tropic, a little heaven of tropic in the Climatron in the Missouri Botanical Garden, and that's why I'm there. I study the plants, especially in the tropical regions, how they are related to each other, and how we can discover new species of these plants, and how we can preserve them. We know that we're losing a species even before we know they exist. We know that the battle to save them is a hard one because we're racing against the time. Like, humans are everywhere. We are impacting our environment in ways that are increasing all the time. Scientists don't make it everywhere. We try to do our best and we try to save as much as we can. And the first step in saving anything is understanding that it exists. I always say that if we can put that little seed of a scientist in kids, like, we will have a lot of good scientists out there. We actually have 3 different students that are studying their PhD in plant biology in universities here in the St. Louis area. So they came from other institutions across the US and they ended up in the graduate programs here in St. Louis because of the connection with the garden, of course. They are studying their PhDs and they're gonna have a really good career in plant biology specific because of that first impression that we made on them when they were doing their internships. Most researchers that wanna study a plant, their first place to go will be the Missouri Botanical Garden because we have a huge collection available for researchers. On top of that, besides doing just basic science of knowing what the species are, we have a really strong program in conservation. We want to preserve all these plants that we have and the plants that we are hoping to discover in the future as well. We want to preserve them. The other thing is that we have had a history of doing this for almost 200 years now. So it's an institution that is respectable by anybody around the world because of our science, of our research, and our plants have been around and have been the standard for a lot of other institutions for hundreds of years. I always try to relate to people, my plants grow everywhere, so I can basically be anywhere, but I chose to be in St. Louis because there are so many of them here. And I can study them, and I can do things with them, I can understand them, and that's what I want to be here.
On August 18, 1960, the first palm tree was planted in the Climatron at the Missouri Botanical Garden. This was weeks before it opened to the public on October 1st. The Climatron was designed by local architects with no interior support columns to allow more light to penetrate the space. In 1976, it was named one of the 100 most significant architectural achievements in U.S. history.
The first time you see 40 or 80 or 200 acres of sunflower, It's really amazing, right? It's just a beautiful sight. But what they don't realize is there's actually a strategic raw material that plant is producing.
And that is natural rubber. David Woodburn sees sunflowers as hope for the future. Woodburn is CEO of Edison Agrosciences. In 2020, the St. Louis-based ag tech startup said it produced a world's first, a sheet of natural rubber produced from sunflower leaves. The sunflowers were grown in a lab at the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. Edison Agrosciences is using gene editing technology to increase the levels of natural rubber in sunflowers for extraction.
Leverage the 1.5 million to 2 million acres a year that's grown in the U.S. to produce rubber.
The idea gained support. BioGenerator, the investment arm of BioSTL, invested, helping the company's move to St. Louis from North Carolina. Edison Agrosciences leveraged $1.7 million in federal grant funding, and it won a $50,000 grant from Arch Grants in St. Louis.
Some of our experimental plants were in a field trial here in Missouri, and we saw an increase in natural rubber in those plants.
The latest achievement is winning a spot in a Wells Fargo Innovation Incubator, receiving up to $250,000 and technical support from the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. So why so much interest in sunflower rubber?
There's a huge supply chain issue with natural rubber. It's a strategic raw material that's used in thousands, tens of thousands of products, and all of it is grown over 10,000 miles away and harvested manually from a tree species that's been wiped from its native continent by disease.
Woodburn explains 90% of the world's natural rubber comes from Southeast Asia.
The entire rubber market is split roughly evenly between natural rubber and synthetic. We still rely on natural rubber because it has certain performance characteristics that can't be matched by synthetic materials.
Common examples range from high-performance tires to athletic shoes.
Either due to temperature extremes, abrasion resistance, impact resistance. Consider an aircraft tire. At altitude is at least minus 40 degrees C. And then upon touchdown, the surface temperature when that rubber hits the pavement is 400 degrees. And so a synthetic material can't handle that type of extreme.
He says every year sunflower yields in the U.S. produce roughly 50,000 tons of natural rubber in plant leaves. But the concentration in each sunflower would be too low and costly for extraction. With the Wells Fargo Innovation Incubator funding and support, Woodburn hopes to expand research to further identify varieties of sunflowers with higher rubber content for selective breeding in order to boost natural rubber production, making extraction possible.
There are two approaches, the gene editing approach. But the other approach is to look at the genetic diversity that's already existent and then just breed.
Woodburn says it's a golden opportunity for the U.S. to have a reliable source of natural rubber at home.
Scan the QR code on your screen to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Mark your calendars for the 2022 St. Louis Art Fair, taking place September 9th through the 11th. Go behind the art with HEC Media's Meet the Artist series at youtube.com/Meet the Artists.
My name is Dennis Angel. I am a colored pencil artist. I specialize in highly detailed colored pencil drawings. And my work is unique from the standpoint of I incorporate famous pieces of artwork in my still life setups. So whenever you look at my drawings, there's a reference to an artist from the past. One of the reasons I actually initially began using old master drawings and paintings in my still lifes is it was a suggestion of my wife. She's an art historian, and she was watching me work on still lifes, and she suggested that I actually put maybe a postcard or a reference to an artist from the past just to kind of see what that would look like. So I tried it with like a Rembrandt postcard, and it just was like magic. My choice of artists that I incorporate into my still lifes vary. Sometimes I will have visited a museum and seen a beautiful Degas painting, and I'll think to myself, how would that translate this bold impressionist painting with bold brush marks and colors, how could that translate into a highly detailed colored pencil? So it's really fun to kind of take something that's very loose and kind of gestural and expressive, and using a sharp colored pencil, try to produce that feeling, even though, of course, it's all just an illusion. So I really love the challenge of that a whole bunch. My drawings always begin with this famous artist from the past. I tape or tack that reproduction to my studio wall, and then I see the tabletop as kind of a set design with what characters, objects will I introduce into the stage? How do I light the stage? What kind of shadows do I use? So from that perspective, I become kind of like the director, orchestrating this complex setup of objects. And then once it's all arranged and set up, then I just dive in and start drawing the whole thing from observation. My work is really meant to be studied and looked at carefully. There's a lot of details in the work. I would invite the viewer to really spend time with the drawings, because a lot of my thoughts have gone into the drawings in terms of the selection of the objects and the detail and the nuance. I would really, really invite you to come and ask me questions about my work. I really don't think there's a bad question. I love to answer questions about my work, and I love to talk about the work, and I love to meet people who enjoy my work.
You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight.
Conservationist and entomologist Douglas Tallamy's best-selling books have encouraged thousands of readers to participate in conservation efforts starting in our own backyards. From planting a diversity of native species, protecting the tiniest members of the food web, and encouraging local politicians to prioritize reversing habitat destruction, Tallamy offers a blueprint to protect nature for future generations. In Tallamy's latest book, The Nature of Oaks, he focuses on one of our ecosystem's most important species, the mighty oak tree. For today's conversation, Douglas Tallamy is joined by Gene Ponzi, host of KDHX Radio's weekly environmental podcast, Earthworms, and Green Resources Manager for the Missouri Botanical Garden's Earthways Center.
What was one of the first connections, big connections you made with oaks and the value of oak trees compared to other, especially other native species?
My first connection with oaks was I like to climb trees. So I was a little boy and white oaks were perfect. They had big limbs, usually pretty low, and you could get up there. So I always liked white oaks, but it really was our research on host-plant relationships between caterpillars and plants that pointed out oaks as being the very best in terms of supporting caterpillars. And more research showed that, hey, caterpillars are the most important insects we have in terms of supporting food webs. And then more research showed, geez, to make it one nest of birds, you need thousands of caterpillars. So it all started to come together. And we need the plants that make thousands of caterpillars, and nothing does that better than oaks.
If I look up in an oak tree, am I going to see that thing crawling with caterpillars?
No, as a matter of fact, that's a complaint I get. So you talk about all these caterpillars and we can't find them. Well, the birds are looking for those caterpillars too, and they are much better at finding them than we are.
Your message, Doug Tallamy, is so urgent that we are conservation. We need to be part of that. We can't just leave it in the hands of the few experts.
Nature's not optional. We're not going to be on this planet long without it. Segregating nature to someplace else isn't going to work anymore. There is no someplace else. We have to learn how to live with it.
You said 5 or 6 things that anybody can do. What's that list? Let's have it.
Shrink the area you have in lawn. Just have it where you're going to walk. Then put in the keystone plants that are going to support the most life, the most pollinators, and the most biodiversity. That's plant choice. You're planting the right plants. Those plants will also manage the watershed. Grassroots have a root system about 2 inches deep. Anything else has a deeper root system, and that's what manages the watershed. And pollinators, put in a pollinator garden that focuses on specialist pollinators. If you plant for specialist pollinators, the generalists get to use them as well. Turn out your lights at night. Lights are killing our nocturnal insects every single night. Get rid of the invasive plants that you have on your property. So many people have calorie pears, or they've got burning bush, or they've got barberry, and these things just escape, and these things invade our woods. So these are all easy things that people can do.
To find out why he says everyone should learn to love bugs and why birdseed is important in the winter, Watch the full interview at hecmedia.org. A song from the Confluence Chamber Orchestra later on Spotlight.
Henry Shaw founded the Missouri Botanical Garden, one of the first of its kind in the country and one of the best of its kind in the world. And it was his good sense of timing which made the Missouri Botanical Garden an immediate success.
It was the height of the time when people were moving into towns and cities during the Industrial Revolution, and it was precisely the time that people began to think about parks and green spaces. Cemeteries began being built on the outskirts of cities and became open places where people could go for recreation.
As public parks began to develop, so did a standard design, largely based on the philosophy of the country's premier landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted, whose designs included New York City's Central Park.
Olmsted was just, ooh, flowers, no, but Shaw saw them as a way to learn. Olmsted was very much about a naturalistic landscape, one that let the genius of the place speak. Don't make it what it's not. Shaw is in a different camp. He wants to create this sort of library, if you will, of plants that can be a teaching tool and also pleasurable.
After he visited the Missouri Botanical Garden, Olmsted pronounced it dwarfish and paltry. But unfazed by Olmsted's harsh words, Henry Shaw continued developing his own garden in his own way for the rest of his life. But soon after Shaw died, William Trelease was hired as director, and Trelease thought the garden seemed old-fashioned and needed to be redesigned. So he hired a consultant, Frederick Law Olmsted.
After Shaw's death, there was a Olmstedian change. Shaw's garden, especially the garden proper, the herbaceous grounds and the other parts of it were ripped up and replaced with a smooth, grassy knoll that they considered to be an improvement on what Shaw had done.
Olmsted also recommended one other change: tear down Shaw's museum.
It looked to the past, not the future.
For the garden's Board of Trustees, tearing down Shaw's museum was taking a step too far into the future. But Trelease was able to convince them the garden needed to increase its efforts in botanical research, and it has been a large part of the mission ever since, with experts from the Missouri Botanical Garden fanned out all over the world, studying and collecting plants. More recently, the garden has also started collecting plant-related artifacts.
I always find that people do connect to plants really well through the medium of understanding how they are used or were used.
It's an area of study called ethnobotany, and the garden's research center is overstuffed with examples it has collected from all over the world. But without a garden museum, there was no place to put them on display.
They've never been shown before. I think it's very important to get across the results of our research to the public, and in terms that they can enjoy and that they can relate to. And I think some of these objects are captivating.
I'm also looking forward to perhaps organizing some of those exhibits myself and displaying some of my interests in the museum. I acquired recently a birch bark canoe. It has also other parts of it made from other plant material. This really, from my point of view, is a wonderful illustration of the connection between people and plants from the earliest times in North America.
Having a museum once again also gives the garden a chance to display some of the millions of plant specimens stored in its herbarium, some of them older than the garden itself. This specimen was gathered by Charles Darwin.
I'm just over the moon to be able to finally bring them out and to begin telling the story.
Watch the full exclusive documentary at hecmedia.org. Teachers and parents, let your students learn more about Henry Shaw and other amazing people through biography and first-person videos on our educational website, educate.today. To access all resources at a 20% discount, join in August using the coupon code BACKTOSCHOOL2022. In Henry Shaw's original museum, now known as the Stephen and Peter Sachs Museum, you can see Botanical Resonance, plants and sounds in the garden.
My name is Neshka Pfeiffer, and I'm the Stephen and Peter Sachs Museum Curator here at the Missouri Botanical Garden. So Botanical Resonance, Plants and Sounds in the Garden, explores all the different ways that plants affect our sound making, either in nature or the way that humans use them to make musical instruments. The exhibition explores the actual plants thanks to the herbarium here at the garden. They share a variety of plant specimens, and these are all plants that my interns and I researched that are used to make instruments all around the world. And we also look at some of the research that the garden is doing in places like Madagascar, which is a very famous global biodiversity hotspot, and we featured special instruments that are there. We also feature plants that are used in things like Foley, which is sound effects in TV and movies. And then there are 3 commissioned artworks that people can visit when they come and see the exhibition. One of them is a quilted room installation, which doesn't have any sound, and it visualizes how plants communicate with one another, both underground and above ground. There is a sound installation in another gallery that is completely electronically synthesized rainforest, which is an homage to our plant companions on the planet. And it's meant for you to be immersed inside the room and enjoy and listen to this really amazing time in a rainforest. Includes a big rainstorm. And then lastly, there are 2 unique sound walks. There's an artist that designed and composed guided meditation sound walks that are meant for people to dial into with their phones and start from the museum and then work their way outside and go into the garden. I have always been very interested in sort of intangible subjects or pop culture subjects, and people have been talking a lot about sound pollution, noise pollution, kind of how we're overwhelmed with sound, and people who have sensory concerns or really sensitive to lots of sound sometimes find themselves very troubled because there's never really quiet. And so I was thinking that this might be a really great way to explore a subject, and it made immediate sense to me to look at plants because plants are used to make musical instruments. And I have always loved listening to people play instruments, and when I realized how many instruments there were that are used, or plants are used to make, I realized it could be kind of a global story too, which was really important. There is this kind of forward motion in which everything historical kind of continues to remain in your present day. So these tidbits of history are still with us, but we're trying to also look at things in a new way, and that's what the artworks are doing. They're kind of putting us in a mindset where we can think from the plant's perspective for a change, maybe not our own, and maybe that will help us develop other skills and other intuitions the next time that we encounter a plant or a sound-making plant. What I really do hope is that people will continually come back to it, so if they're able to, especially if they're here in St. Louis, but so that there's a manageable amount of information here and experiences. And so if they really enjoy it and they know they can come back, then they can revisit it over and over, and maybe they'll see something that they didn't get a chance to see again. So Botanical Resonance, Plants and Sounds of the Garden is on view through the end of March of 2023. So several months to still go and see it. It's open every day. The garden's open from 11:30 to 4:30. And the admission to the museum is free with garden admission.
Looking for St. Louis-centric videos to use in your classroom? Check out our educational resources at educate.today.
next week, a story of love and betrayal between Jack and Jackie Kennedy. Plus, the new fashionable exhibit at the Foundry. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.